del azafrán. También una modalización que aparentemente disminuye la extrañeza frente a una costumbre o práctica china, pero que logra el efecto contrario. Por ejemplo, cuando dice este género de la preocupación de explicar todo esto. La referencia a los materiales con que están hechos los objetos y utensilios, por ejemplo, la madera del ataúd, que explica que era una madera especial porque soportaba muy bien la humedad para durar, para persistir. O también, por ejemplo, la explicación de las túnicas, de que eran hechos, todo eso. Sin embargo, volvemos a la secuencia narrativa porque es con eso que quiero terminar, la importancia literaria. Y tomemos las palabras exactas con que lo hace el padre Manuel Díaz Jr., que dice, después de la introducción, agrede origituriam aduius mortis peculiaria. Y de hecho, todo el texto se distingue por la atención a muchos detalles combinados e integrados en planos generales que se suceden, que alternan el foco de la narración. Es como si hubiera una cámara de cine para capturar el momento y para mostrar los personajes individuales, el rey o el príncipe, o los grupos restringidos como las muchas mujeres de Wanli, sus muchos hijos y nietos, o los sacerdotes y magistrados, aunque restringido en la corte china es un hipérbole reduccionista. O las grandes multitudes de la gente en las calles y de plazas, o los miles de soldados. De estos, algunos custodiaban las puertas de la ciudad prohibida, 1000 por puerta, 500 de fuera, 500 de dentro. Otros, a pie o a caballo, seguían el ataúd, turnándose a intervalos regulares, 300 a la vez, de un total de 3000, y otros se mantenían firmes a ambos lados del camino recorrido por el cortejo fúnebre, y 40.000 más hacían guarda al lugar del entierro. Hablo intencionalmente con la sugerencia de que el efecto logrado por esta narración es equivalente a una película, un espectáculo que podemos ver claramente con la imaginación, oculis mentis ostendi, el proceso que en retórica se denominó ante oculos ponere, recurriendo a la figura retórica. Los latinos decían evidencia o illustratio y los griegos enargeia. El padre Manuel Díaz Jr. debe haber sido perfectamente consciente de la eficacia del cuadro que ha pintado, porque dice que vaya a poner uno conspecto ante oclos vuestras paternitates. Como si estuviéramos viendo una maravillosa película épica. Esta narración me hace, perdón, es un japonés, pero para mí este es un film de Akira Kurosawa, puro film de Akira Kurosawa. Seguimos cronológicamente los muchos meses de las ceremonias. Primo día, segundo día, día tercio, cuarto día, quinto demo, ad postremo día. Eso se ha pasado meses y vamos acompañando día a día. La sucesión de los ritos de inde, post, et, polisíndeton. Contemplamos el desfile jerarquizado y definido de quien viene, cuando viene a rendir homenaje. Primo loco ibad rex de inde coniuges tum fili consequebantur nepotes postremo tandem nonuli eunuchi exaulicis praecipue. Seguimos los cambios de lugar, del palacio del rey al de la reina madre, del interior del palacio al patio, de las plazas intramuros de la ciudad prohibida al camino decorado por donde pasa el féretro. Distinguimos el día de la noche, como al describir los lugares donde pernoctaba el cortejo fúnebre. en grandes esteras y carpas, y en medio aquel en que se ponía el féretro, y los toldos bajo los cuales se hacían los sacrificios. Incluso vemos el amanecer del día, inlusquente día, cuando el emperador sale del palacio con su hijo. Como una película, sí, los 5 sentidos están llamados al trabajo de la imaginación. El movimiento, el color de la ropa, zapatos y gorras, las diferencias en la forma de vestir entre hombres y mujeres, el detalle en zoom de las cintas blancas que deben colgar de las gorras con la medida justa, es decir, tocando los hombros, cándidas, huitas, excipis, pileis, adúmeros colgantes, las mesas con animales, un cerdo, una oveja, frutas, pasteles, que serán consagradas en sacrificio, los estandartes desplegados, las charolas cubiertas de seda, las figuras hechas con papel de hombres, leones, elefantes, caballos, las postraciones descritas con el detalle de cuántas veces hay que hacerlas y con qué gestos se acompañan el golpe de cabeza decenas de veces, genibus ante cadaver flexis capite leniterumum attingens. Todo atrae la vista. Por otro lado, oímos copiosos llantos, lamentos y suspiros, también normativamente determinados, 15, ni más ni menos, que deban darse durante los homenajes reverentes, y el sonido de tambores y címbalos y campanas, junto con el silencio sin música de todos los templos. Y la tropa de caballos y las voces de quienes le piden a la difunta que acceda a pernoctar en el lugar elegido y al día siguiente le preguntan si quiere volver a irse y continuar hasta el lugar de la sepultura. Y también el olor, el incienso, las tabelas aromáticas que se queman, pero también el humo de los objetos incinerados y animales sacrificados. Y el tacto, con la sugerencia de las telas ásperas y los zapatos, las cuerdas que sustituyen los cinturones, la madera áspera del ataúd y la suavidad de la seda de banderas y estandartes, o los cojines de distintos tamaños que el rey con sus propias manos ha colocado dentro del ataúd para comodidad del cuerpo defunto de su madre. Luinaria multa et magna et parua ut cadaver sit melius compositum. Hasta el gusto, al menos el del ayuno que prohibía a la población consumir carnes y alcohol, y el ayuno del rey, que en los primeros 3 días solo ha comido lo que venéis allí. Nuestra propuesta es, y termino, por tanto, traer a la literatura textos que han sido considerados marginales, que solo han sido apreciados cuando lo son por su valor y interés histórico o etnográfico. Como se desprende de lo dicho, este texto es antológico en este sentido, pero no es el único, hay mucho. Además de plantear otras cuestiones que no podemos abordar aquí, como la forma en que los jesuitas se asociaron a este luto y funerales de muchos meses. Pero el foco que queremos dar y que merece ser foco de muchos otros textos de los misioneros jesuitas es su valor literario, su riqueza de construcción y de estilo. Ambas perspectivas pueden incluso aliarse sabiamente, porque el extenso relato de las exequias representa al fin y al cabo a la manera clásica la inserción de un exemplum que en este caso al fin concreto, y el padre Manuel Díaz Jr. lo dice, ilustra un ejemplo que ilustre el amor y el respeto de los hijos por sus padres, así a menudo reconocido por los jesuitas entre las cualidades de los chinos, tanto más cuanto que coincidía con el 4º mandamiento cristiano. Escribe así el padre Manuel Díaz Jr., concluyendo el informe con la declaración del objetivo que ha guiado su narración tan detallada y extensa. Ut intelligatur quanti sint apud sinas de mortuis honores. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Maria Cristina, for your very vivid presentation of this literary text and for bringing out the literary quality in the text, which you did so well. And so now it's a turn for another project. So I invite Stefan Zathammer and Dominik Berrens. So, well, I'll just say a few words of Stefan and Dominik are from the University of Innsbruck, and they will present their very fascinating project to me, the Nova Scientia, Early Modern Scientific Literature and Latin, which I think certainly represents a major gap in the literature, and not only in the study of Neo-Latin, but also in the study of history of science. So I'm eager to hear what you want to say.
So it's working, yes. So thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for having us here and for the kind invitation to come here to this lovely conference. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our NOSCEMUS project, and I will do so in due course as not to lose time. So fundamental changes occurred in the study of nature between the late 15th century and the 18th centuries, leading to the emergence of modern science as we know it. This process would have been impossible without Latin as the scientific lingua franca of the era, just as today's science is hard to imagine without English. At present, this crucial role of Latin is insufficiently acknowledged, and the hundreds of thousands of scientific texts written in Latin have largely remained neglected. This severely limits the scope of research into the history of science, an otherwise thriving field. The ESC project NOSCEMUS Nova Scientia, Early Modern Scientific Literature in Latin, intends to decisively advance our understanding of the interrelation of Latin and science in the early modern times. The project was granted to Professor Martin Koreniak and is hosted jointly by the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute für Neulateinische Studien in Innsbruck and the Institute of Classical Philology and Neo-Latin Studies at the university. The project started in October 2017 and is now coming to an end after 5 busy years. And the core group consists of the principal investigator, Martin Koreniak, who sends his best greetings, 3 postdoctoral and 1 doctoral researcher, and someone for the digital humanities part, which happens to be Stefan. After a few months of working on the project, it became apparent that we would need further assistance with the mathematical works and those of theoretical physics, as none of the core group is a mathematician. And therefore, we hired Florian Baumgartner, who is a mathematician with an interest in the history of this discipline. So he read and wrote also many of the entries in our database on mathematics, so be sure that they are kind of safe and reliable. The project aims at studying text with a philological methodology, and most of our group members, as I said, are philologists by training. Still, we are reaching out to historians of science, and therefore needed some expertise in this field, which was provided by our very honorable scientific advisory board. William Barton, who's also a key researcher of the science lab at the LBI in Innsbruck, was also part of our group. And many more scholars came for shorter or longer periods as guests and fellows to work with us. And so we had a very thriving 5 years and a very good group of people studying early modern scientific texts in Latin. In the rest of the talk, I will focus on the project and present some of its outcomes. As I have already said, it aims at advancing our understanding of Latin's fundamental role in early modern science that emerged from its pre-modern origins between the 15th and the 18th centuries. At that time, Europe's most important lingua franca and the principal language of the educated discourse in Europe, at least, was Latin. After Latin had been restored from its medieval usage to classical norms by humanists, Neo-Latin, as it is called today, quickly spread across the continent through printed textbooks and standardized teaching practices. So naturally, Latin was the leading language of science, a role it had inherited from the Middle Ages, when it had been without any serious rival in the realm of Philosophia Naturalis. Over the next centuries, Latin gradually lost its monopoly on science, but it remained important in most areas, at least until the 18th century. So we have heard about this already by Madame Vaquet and Philippe Reddy in their talks yesterday. However, this leading role of Latin language in science and education in general has often been neglected, as I said, in recent studies from the history of science. As is the case with most Neo-Latin projects, you will know it, the better part of the relevant texts is basically unknown to date. To cope with this situation, a twofold approach is used in our project, making it possible to confront the necessity of presenting and reviewing the evidence, but at the same time avoid postponing analysis indefinitely until all the relevant material is processed. This would take too long. So the first of these approaches, so reviewing the field and presenting it, consists in the examination and classification of the formal variety and range of content of Latin scientific literature. It serves to create an overall picture. The results will be presented in form of a monograph, which I will say a few words in a moment, and especially through our database and the digital source book, on which Stefan will talk a little later. The second step is the analysis of the function of Latin as a medium of communication within and beyond the scientific community. This second objective is achieved through a series of 4 interlinked monographs assessing key functions of Latin scientific texts. These are naming new phenomena, describing and explaining them, convincing others of the views expressed, and promoting science as a whole. In the remaining time, I will present the 5 monographs very briefly and then hand over to Stefan as the expert of the database. The first monograph is written by our principal investigator, Martin Korniak. As the preliminary title, Latin Scientific Literature, 1450 to 1850, indicates, it provides an overview of the scientific literature from the beginning of print to the 19th century. Its main parts proceeds genre by genre, so literary genre by literary genre, and the single chapters explain the origin and the development of every genre, examine its formal features, and also explain where it has been used, for which purpose, and by whom. The manuscript is complete, I've already seen it, and Martin will send it to the publisher, which happens to be Oxford University Press, at the end of this month or the beginning of October, so watch out for the book. Then the following monographs are the ones linked to the key functions of Latin scientific literature that I've mentioned earlier. My own sub-project deals with the first of these functions, that is naming. So I'm German, so I couldn't resist pointing at having the first mentioning of the potato. So giving new things and notions names is integral to scientific progress. Since a name establishes a matter as an object of scientific inquiry, what is named and how it is named influence what future scientists may think and the course of a discipline may take. The results of the early modern naming process are partly still with us and are comparatively well known. I can just remind of the speech the director gave in the morning. So like zoologists and botanists use these names still today. But a systematic, detailed analysis has been missing. In my book, I first give a general overview of forms of names and the processes of naming in early modern science, and then focus on natural history because this is the realm where most names have been given. I distinguish the natural history of the old, the new, and the microscopic world because these areas pose different challenges and resulted in different forms of names. We have discussed here in this conference how the contact with non-European cultures influenced Latin, and this has especially, natural history is an especially rich field where new names have been introduced into the Latin vocabulary. The manuscript has been submitted as my habilitation thesis in April, and I hope to have the results by the end of this month so that I can revise it for publication. So the next book is written by Ovanes Akopian, and he's working on explaining early modern science. As this is a vast topic, he has focused on the explanation of natural disasters like floods, earthquakes, avalanches, and the like. And his book is under contract with Johns Hopkins University Press, but not yet finished. Then Johanna Lugin is studying the rhetorical character of Neo-Latin scientific works from the 17th to the 18th centuries. Her book will present examples of Neo-Latin didactic poetry as a vehicle of persuasion in early modern science. It will show how experiments were used as rhetorical devices within rational argumentation and analyze the role of patronage and self-fashioning as rhetorical tool within scientific innovation. She will probably finish her book within the next years, and she has a scholarship to do so. The last but not least important project is conducted by Irina Tauchnik. As the topic promotion of science is particularly far-reaching, she studies strategies of promotion in Latin and Greek poems on Copernicus until the 19th century. And her book will serve as her PhD thesis and will be submitted in October. So look out for these books in the hopefully very near future. And I may now hand over to Stefan, who will present the database, which is already usable.
Thank you, Dominik. Now I'm going to switch to the digital humanities part of our project. The NOSCEMUS project consists of a digital part in addition to the classic research output in form of articles and monographs. The core of the digital part is a database in which about 1,000 Latin texts dealing with natural sciences were collected in the course of our project. As a software of our database, we have chosen to use the open source software MediaWiki. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think the screenshot is not going to be better. As I said, we have decided to use as a database software MediaWiki. On the one hand, I strongly believe that free software should be used in academic context whenever it is possible. On the other hand, MediaWiki offers an environment that can also be used by non-IT specialists without lengthy training. Another advantage of MediaWiki is that because of its similarity to the well-known Wikipedia, even the mere user or reader of the database can quickly find his way around. In addition to that, with the numerous extensions available for MediaWiki, a database built on it is very flexible and can be adapted very easily to any new needs that may arise. As already mentioned, our database contains around 1,000 entries. Each entry contains the usual bibliographical information on a work. You can see one example of an entry here on the screen. And in addition to the mere bibliographical information, there is also a short summary of the content, which usually consists about 500 to 1,000 words. The selection presented in our database does not constitute an anthology as works famous for their authors, their groundbreaking character, or other reasons are neither included nor excluded in a systematic way. Whether the collection is intended to be representative of Latin literature's engagement with contemporary science in terms of chronological spread, literary forms, and scientific disciplines. And in accordance with the project's epistemological interest, the description of the single works focus mainly on their literary features, such as structures, style, and terminology. And their contents are outlined as far as necessary to that end. Apart from the database, the digital output of the project includes a digital source book in which almost all the texts we have collected over the last 5 years are searchable in full text. And in total, we have now about 400,000 pages which are fully searchable. And this is now the second part of my presentation. I'm now quickly presenting the digital source book and the software or the tools we use to create it. Some preliminary remarks. The digital humanities landscape has grown exponentially in the last couple of years and also in the field of Neo-Latin studies. And today a substantial amount of texts are available online as scans. If we remember how text editions, even digital ones, were created just a few years ago, a massive change has taken place in this field. Printed editions required an immense amount of work, and in order to be usable and searchable, indices had to be created in laborious manual work. It didn't look much different for digital editions a few years ago. Although their searchability, of course, was easier from the beginning, the creation was at least associated with just as much effort, especially manual typing and manual correcting. Despite the impressive progress digitization techniques have made over the last couple of years, there are still some significant shortcomings. Often only scans with no OCR at all are available, or the OCR, which is available, for example, on Google Books, is of such poor quality that, again, it is almost useless or completely useless. If we look at the editing activity in the field of Neo-Latin studies, it is striking that, unlike in classical philology, no standard has yet been established. There is a multitude of proposals as to what an edition of Neo-Latin text should look like. There are two main opposing directions here: readability and authenticity. Some researchers call for standardization and modernization of orthography and punctuation based on the standards of classical Latin, or at least on the standards we apply in our modern editions of classical authors. Some researchers, on the other hand, advocate for the greatest possible authenticity. That is, they want to present the text as they find it and want to retain original orthography, punctuation, and accents. Another point to keep in mind when we are preparing printed editions or also digital editions of Neo-Latin texts is that Neo-Latin texts are mainly used by non-Latinists. For example, by philologists of modern languages, of course by historians, but also by theologians and by lawyers researching legal history. That's so far for the preliminary remarks, which I had in mind when I was making my my strategy how to compile and how to order our digital source book. The texts in our digital source book are so-called dirty OCR. That means that the text has not been corrected again by hand. We were able to opt for this because the error rate in most of our works, in the recognition of most of our works, was well below 1%. For the OCR recognition of our texts, we use the Transcribus tool. Many of you maybe have heard of it, which was developed at the University of Innsbruck over the last couple of years. Transcribus is based on deep learning and works independently of language and alphabet. I don't want to go into further technical details here, but only point out what I consider to be the most important advantage. With Transcribus, and especially with its usability, even technical laymen can easily train a text recognition models for their specific texts. For the text corpus collected in our project, we faced 4 major problems when training a text recognition model. The first problem was the long time frame. We are dealing with texts from 5 centuries, from the beginning of printing in the 15th century, and we have also texts of the end of the 19th century. The next problem was that we have about 10 different languages in our works. Of course, all works were written primarily in Latin, but many of them have a considerable amount of passages in other languages. For example, Greek, of course Greek, then German, Hebrew, English, Italian, French, and Spanish. The third problem was that we had to deal with a lot of different typefaces. This problem was especially violent that we have had to deal with a huge amount of different Greek typefaces which were developed between the humanistic era and the 19th century. And also we had to deal with a considerable amount of German, let's call them German typefaces, ranging from Schwabacher to the Standard Fraktur. And the third major problem, or the fourth major problem, were the abbreviations. Of course, you know that many of the early prints were still full of abbreviations, and sometimes the abbreviations are not clear and very ambiguous, and one has to really know what you are reading to correctly expand the abbreviation. So here are some examples of prints we had to deal with. On the left side, we have a copy of Vespucci's Mundus Novus, printed in Rostock in 1505. And on the right side, we have one of our later books, Semmelweis De Vita Plantarum, printed in Vienna in 1844. And 2 other examples. On the left side, we have an edition of Theophrast's De Lapidibus with some very humanistic Greek typeface. And on the other side, we have an edition of Bembos de Etna, printed in Venice, with a very clear and not heavily abbreviated, beautiful humanistic print. So now I'm going quickly to show you the transcription guidelines I used when I was training our model for Transcribus. Our main goal was going for searchability and readability. But in order to give the user a maximum of freedom, standardization in the transcription process have been kept to a minimum. Normalizations have been implemented in the following cases. Ligatures and standard abbreviations have been expanded. The long S was transcribed as the normal S. Small caps were transcribed as majuscules. For the sake of some early modern flair, I decided to keep some special characters like the et or the e caudata. When training the model for the OCR recognition, I decided to go for two steps. In the first step, I trained one special or individual model for each century our project is dealing with. So I trained one model for prints of the 15th and 16th century, one of the 17th century, and so on and so forth. And I also trained some smaller models which had mostly texts where a lot of German was present or where a lot of Greek or only Greek was present. Each individual model in the end consists about 500 to 600 pages taken from at least 10 different works. The works for the training data were selected with the aim of ensuring they are representative in terms of chronological spread and that also they use typefaces were also represented in a sufficient manner. The second step was I took the training data of all the individual models and trained one general model with which I then let recognize all our whole collection. The last model now contains about 2,600 fully corrected pages, which means there are about 500,000 words as training material. Here we can see some examples how the OCR recognition did on these texts. One example from Theophras de Lapidibus Liber with Greek and with the Latin translation at the bottom. And here we have an example from an alchemical lexicon, from a German alchemical lexicon, where we have the Latin words and then the German translations on the right side. There, of course, the model is far from perfect and there are still some known issues. Occasional or the inconsistency in the transcription of quotation marks, punctuation marks, and diacritics is still rather high because sometimes they are not really that legible in the prints and the model don't recognize it as a diacritic. Also, unfortunately, the error rate of the transcription of Greek words or passages is still high. The main problem, I think, is the vast amount of different early modern Greek typefaces and the lack of training material. It looks way better with German facture, but that's only the causes that I was inclined to transcribe or to correct more German texts than humanistic Greek. At the moment, the detection of italic or bold print is not possible, but I hope that this is coming in the near future. And at the moment also, there is still the problem what to do with ambiguous abbreviations. I have only put two examples on here. The only solution, of course, is more training material and more training material. But of course, that needs a lot of time and a lot of manual correcting the texts. Yeah, I hope I was able to show you some interesting features and outputs we had in our project in the last 5 years, and thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much for this very interesting and important project you're carrying out, despite all the possible difficulties you're facing.
With warm-heartedness, first of all, thanks very much to the organizers of this wonderful conference in this beautiful city, Siena, especially to Professor Francesco, Stella, and Professor Chiara Tommasi. Instead of commenting on the details of today's conference, I would like to tell a short personal story that may be related to the topic Global Latin. Although I am an ordinary Korean, that is a Confucian agent, obeying to tradition, elder persons, and the authorities. But as soon as I was born, I was baptized in the influence of my grandparents. Afterwards, I have grown up as a Catholic with the given name Daniel. In short, I am a descendant of Korean martyrs who had been persecuted since 18th century. As it were, by amazing grace, some of them have been canonized saints by approval of the Holy See of Vatican. Thus, Korean Catholic Church is well known that its foundation was not imposed by external missionaries' force, but it was built in its devotees' voluntarily reception of faith. Maybe my ancestors firstly contacted Western missionaries, many missions étrangères de Paris in China. Perhaps that is the starting point of lingua latina in Korea, as well as in my life's origin. During my youth, I have been most influenced by a non-fictional novel, Japanese writer Endo Shushaku's Chinmoku. The English title is Silence. That was written on the basis of the history of a Jesuit missionary from Portugal in 17th centuries. Actually, I had prepared to be a Catholic monk of an order by learning ecclesiastical Latin. But once again, by amazing grace, I failed to join it. Instead, I have studied classical Latin. And now I am here as an evidence of vectors of global Latin. So Latin language has an existential meaning to me for being myself. In other words, Civis Latinus sum. I am a part of history of global Latin. Nowadays, still for us, most Koreans, Latin language seems not global yet, like English as a lingua franca. But they begin to understand its historical significance and value for identifying themselves. Such academical outcomes, the publication of Hagiographica Koreana of Professor An, and a series of Roma Sinica may have made Korean and East Asian history written in Latin more globally. These results may be also a part of grand history of lingua latina within a wide range from classical, medieval, neo, and digital Latin. We made a history. You made a history. And we have been a history it for 2 days convention in these hard times. I think you, as well as I, have chances to understand what kind of role Latin language did have in the inter-exchange between Eastern and Western by this important conference with excellent worldwide scholar colleagues. You. Oh, I mean, once again, I would like to appreciate it to the co-organizers and supporters in Siena, especially to Signora Emanuela Carbe and Signora Paola Mocella and hidden global Latinists over there. Please give applause for them. And I hope another successive and successful studies and communication with each other soon again. This time is a great opportunity for me to learn and to extend the view over the horizon. Of course, over the horizon, I believe we could meet again with more global Latin in the future. Grazie mille.
So, first of all, I would like to thank you everyone for being here, but I must say that, yes, we are two organizers, but there is a third person who, unfortunately, he is missing, is Andrea Balbo from Turin. He apologizes, but he had some severe familiar problems and he hopes to come to Pisa tomorrow. So this conference was conceived originally as a diptych, I must say, as a twofold conference. The first one here in Siena was meant to explore Latin as a global language, as we heard during these days, and as is testified by the many countries from where each of us comes. And the conference in Pisa is devoted to a more specific topic, which has partly been hinted at here as well. It is scientific, the role of Latin as a scientific language and as a bridge between West and East, between European culture and Asian culture in the modern era. So in Pisa, we will discuss, some of you will take part in the conference. For others who cannot join us physically there, we invite you to attend the conference online. And the conference is, once again, is divided into two parts. When we taught about science and scientific language, of course, we had in mind hard science, that is medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and so on. But as yesterday Francesco said, science can be also Wissenschaft in a global sense. And so we decided to discuss also humanistic science, that is law, religion, philosophy, so humanistic thought. So the conference will develop around these two axes. I don't want to speak longer because it's late. We had a very, I must say, very dense discussion. And so I finally want to thank again all the organizers of this conference in Siena. And I leave the floor to Francesco, with whom we had a very, I must say, profuse collaboration in arranging. And I must say, if a biographical note is allowed, I must say that originally I was trained as a classic philologist. I'm a Latinist, but I always wanted to study Chinese. In my youth, I wanted to study Chinese, and this project gives me the opportunity to do both of them. So.
So thank you, Chiara, and I add my thanks again for the last time, I hope, to all of you. I am very happy about what we have done in this 1.5 days, and I'm satisfied to have the chance to gather most of the best specialists in in this matter, the study of the Latin outside Europe, and the Latin as a world language, more or less world language. And I feel that I have learned very much in this 1.5 day. I am so a newcomer in these studies. I am medieval Latinist. I felt obliged to take this way also because I am the successor of a medieval Latinist who came from Korea. So I'm happy that he could be happy about what me and you are doing now. I learned so much, but I was also filled with doubts. So it is a merit of all of you. My views are changing compared with what I had only a couple of days ago. That there is a richness of topics. I cannot make conclusion, not to list all of them, but I see, at least to my opinion, that some streams are very hot in these views, in this perspective, and I hope that some of them will be taken over in the PISA following of the initiative. For example, the interplay between classic heritage and patristic and medieval heritage in the Jesuit or Chinese or Japanese or Korean Latin, the many confrontation and clashes of civilization. There is more than one. So classic and Christian, classic and Christian in respect of the Eastern civilization, the many different Eastern civilizations, and all of these produces I have seen, I've learned some question of untranslatability, I would say, of concept of ideas. What we have heard by Aldo, by you, about the simple the translation of simple, so to say, concepts such as God or soul, and we have already experienced this kind of remark in a conference we have had at the University for Stranieri, or foreigners in Siena, about the translation or in Eastern languages of the Divina Commedia of Dante. Almost the most fundamental ideas of Dante are untranslatable in Chinese, Japanese, Korean, maybe some more in Arabic because it is closer to the medieval culture, which was shared by Dante. And what this was a surprise to me. It was a kind of disappointment about the universality of the humankind. There is no universality of the language. And after what I have heard by Mussler, by Anna and others, I have also doubted about the globality of the value of Latin. Was Latin real a global language? Was Latin a language of the global Jesuit network, which is another kind of thing? Or it is that a false question? And was the strength of the Jesuits their religious impulse and faith on, or was their strength the scientific knowledge that they bring with them, and more than scientific, what we you today would call technological, so practical application of sciences. And this would change the way we will say, define, and maybe appreciate or not appreciate them. I have also learned that dictionaries and grammars as a wonderful source for comparing civilization, and so as such, they at least me, I underestimated that until now. So really, I thank you for all what you had taught to me and to each other in these days. I hope that not like the powerful Jesuits network, but a kind of little network can arise from these days, from the Pisa days. Maybe we can envisage or imagine a common project for better deepen to these matters, such complicated web of topics that give to us and last witness testified that some more lively impulse and moment in comparison with the traditional history of literature we all practice since decades. So thank you again for all, and I would make that so to pass the torch from Siena to Pisa.